bit more value in terms of being able to aggregate a lot of that data. So this is a really interesting report which you would probably generate every single day into somebody's mailbox. And it doesn't just tell us, did the backup jobs run, which is important, whether they were successful or not. But what it's actually telling us is, of the VMs that were backed up, based on when they were backed up, do they meet our restore point objectives? So, based on your scheduling, you may get all your backups complete, but you're still not getting all your backups less than 24 hours old. You're still not getting your backups less than 7 days old. So, being able to have that compliance piece is really important. And we can see here in our own environment, my laser's not working, I think the battery's flat, but we've got a large number of VMs which actually fall outside what we've designated as the RPO, which is 24 hours. And a certain number do. And obviously if we scroll down, we're going to be able to see the details of which VMs we're talking about, when they actually were last backed up, what the outcome of that backup was. So being able to get that feedback on where we would go to address that. Things like compliance in terms of how many restore points are we retaining, all of that kind of stuff. So if we're having a series of failures or sporadic failures for whatever reason, being able to understand what position does that put us in, where are we with our compliance at the moment. And again, being able to automate all of that, just have it arrive for somebody, takes care of a lot of that babysitting element. Someone's not having to sit and go through the console and say, okay, this job failed, I'm looking into the logs, now I can see why. We're having all of that centralised, and we're also getting that overarching view and dealing with those problems. Tell me about problem trends. So this is pretty cool in terms of being able to start to get rid of a lot of the guesswork as well. So another element of the babysitting for backups is understanding that we obviously have resources which underpin those backups. The infrastructure that we're using to either move the data, store the data, do the processing for deduplication and compression, all of that stuff is the stuff that we have to look after, and if we don't look after it, the backups are either going to run slowly, or they're going to run unreliably, or they're not going to run at all. So being able to really understand what's happening in that infrastructure at the time of the backups and what the outcomes are relevant to that is really important. So we can do some pretty cool things, particularly around storage. So being able to understand, based on everything that's happened with Veeam in the last 60 days, 30 days, 90 days, whatever we designate, I want to understand if I'm going to be okay in 90 days or 120 days. So based on the trends that we're seeing with the retention policies that we have, are we going to have enough backup storage in 120 days? If not, how much storage would I need to provision to get to 120 days? So for someone who's running that storage and then receiving that report every week, they would know, okay, someone's suddenly provisioned 50 more VMs, they're being backed up. We used to have an infinite amount of storage that looked as though it was going to last us forever, but all of a sudden we're going to run out of storage in 60 days, and then they've got that 60 days to provision that storage. So being able to be a bit less sort of finger in the wind and a bit less reactive, and moving to a more proactive stance. And being more confident with things like allowing administrators to do their thing in a virtual environment and be sure that they can add a bunch of virtual machines, they will get backed up, and that's something that the backup administrator is going to catch in a timely manner. Backup files growth, so again, just getting an idea of how much is being consumed per backup job, what that growth story looks like, graphing around that as well in that report, being able to really understand exactly what's happening. Do we see an unexpected spike? Was there some kind of issue there? And keep me informed. So this one's around day-to-day use of the product. So being able to have dashboarding from various sources. So we have a number of different dashboarding sources, including a standalone client, which is in the Veeam One Monitor, a web-based one as well, which I think we've got here. And we can also leverage these inside an extension for the VMware Web UI as well. So if you're running the VMware Web UI, you can extend our product out into that, and you can do most things that you do with Veeam within that Web UI. So not really having to jump from console to console, and being able to manage, increasingly a lot of stuff will be in there for VMware administrators, but being a part of that story. But in terms of this sort of day-to-day monitoring stuff, really cool. We can't really see it very clearly there. Not sure why the picture's so bad. But being able to see trends as well. So being able to see what's happening with the repositories, what's happening in terms of job duration. Are we seeing things increase, decrease, stay the same? all of those things which you may not be able to pick up on if you're an engineer who's just looking at job logs coming in day by day or success or failure emails. That sort of broader trending story is something that people at the moment either don't have the capability to do within their existing products, or it's something they're having to really approach manually. So Excel spreadsheets everywhere, a lot of time being consumed in terms of being able to understand that story. All of that is just there sort of out of the box. And when we talk about these kind of, the installation that we've done in this demonstration lab, the installation in terms of being able to get things up and running is quite straightforward. The product, doesn't require a lot of changes on the infrastructure side. It bolts in on top of what you've already got quite neatly, and then it allows you to specialise and optimise within your own environment in terms of how do I attach to the storage, how am I going to move that data around in the best possible way. But in terms of being able to get up and start to see this kind of information and be able to start to back machines up, that's quite a short and straightforward story. So when we want to restore, obviously that's super important. So one of the things we often get is just a bit of a misunderstanding around, we back up at a VM level, and a lot of the people who will approach us at shows and things like that, they think that we can just restore the same VM back to its original location. The restore options are many. I think they were saying there's 38 different restore options, something, some big number. They did one of those infographics they sent around the other day. It's got all the numbers on it. But when you have backed up the VM, you can do from a very broad restore down to a very, very granular item level restore with full awareness of where that VM has come from and what it looked like, but also with the ability to throw all of that away. So if we've got a VM that we backed up from a particular host, but we want to restore it to a different host with a different GUID, new security ID, rename it, give it different IP properties, we can do that as well. So if we lose a whole infrastructure, there's no issue, there's no binding to that infrastructure, there's nothing to slow us down in terms of being able to move everything across and get up and running. So very powerful in that way. And you can see here, this is sort of the standard restore items options that we get against a virtual machine. This one's got Exchange on it, so we can also see restore Microsoft Exchange items. But from being able to restore a whole VM down to individual files, individual items, all of that is simple, a few clicks of a wizard to be able to achieve that. And because we're talking about disk-to-disk backups and nearline storage for usually the more recent backups, the speeds and times around that are usually very, very short in comparison to what people are used to. I think we've got some examples here. Explorer for Exchange. So who does restores? Is it people who are doing restores for Exchange at the moment? Is anybody responsible for that? So somebody who loses a mail item. Is it hard at the moment? You got this? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, traditionally it's quite difficult, right? So we talk to people, I was talking to someone from a major organisation today, I'm like, you just put a bit of a time frame around it, we just need to understand, because when we test our software, we want to be able to tell you what kind of benefits you're getting. So no, I'm not sure, I don't want to say, and it's like, is it 24 hours that you can get that item back? They're like, oh no, 48 hours? 72 hours. That's what they tell people if they lose the Exchange item. When we do it, depending on the size of the mail store, I mean, this one took 2 minutes, but slightly bigger mail stores, the mounting time's a little bit higher, but we're talking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, those kind of time frames. And very flexible as well. So talking about whole mailboxes down to individual items, put them back into Exchange, put them into a PST. If it's an individual item, just attach it to an email and send it back to the user. All of that kind of stuff. And for people who are running a service desk, we're seeing changes like people actioning the thing on the phone. So rather than logging a ticket and saying to the person, this is going to take 48 hours, they're able to say, yeah, okay, done, while they're still on the call. So really collapsing down that restore time and really adding a lot of simplicity. But also functionality that would be kind of hard. Like when you're storing from a tape and you think you know when the email is from, and you have to bring down the whole data store from a tape and then restore the item, it's not the right one, so you go and do it again. We can jump in and out of a bunch of restore points very, very quickly, and we've also got the advanced find, which is a full-on query-based search engine for within that data store. So if we want to find out who sent emails between these two mailbox accounts between dates, we can see all of that really quickly, export it to a PST. So it has applications for e-discovery and things like that as well. And in terms of the instant recovery, which is not a very new feature, but it's still a pretty amazing feature, and it's one of the ones that when we go in and show it to people, it's still kind of shocking. Being able to restore a whole virtual machine, regardless of its size, in a very, very short period of time, without moving any of the data out of the backup file. So if you can imagine that you've got a backup file sitting there containing the virtual machines, we just show that to VMware or to Hyper-V. We provide it with some disk to store the change, the changes that happen, but we're able to present the virtual machine and have it started up very, very quickly. So you can see the kind of timeframes we're talking about here in terms of getting that Exchange server back into the VMware environment and starting up. And overall, it's like a minute. It's a minute-ish. And from there, we're just waiting for the operating system to boot up. And once that's accessible, we're going to move it out of the backup file using the hypervisor's built-in technology. So we use storage vMotion or migration to move it out of the backup file in the background and seamlessly. So the time from having a complete failure to being able to prevent a service back to people so that they can use it becomes very, very short. And by virtue of the fact that we're also doing that automated testing, we know exactly how long it's going to take, right? So we can say, we've lost this Exchange server. Last night we did the restore. We'll have a quick look. We know that that took exactly 12 minutes. We can be pretty confident that we're going to be, next 15 minutes, 30 minutes, we're going to be cool. So we can tell people that. It's a whole new level of confidence. So we see a lot of stuff around people not having to spend hours and hours troubleshooting a virtual machine because they'll be like, it's kind of broken, so I'm just going to delete it and restore. Being able to really sort of do away with a lot of that issue resolution that might have taken hours and hours before when a VM goes a little bit off the rails. So we're going to do a demo. I'm not going to do a demo today because it's a bit late in the day. But we'll just revisit these three sort of core things. So in terms of the missing capabilities, a lot of that stuff that we feel wasn't really there for virtualization, we feel we're sort of really strongly filling in a lot of the blanks around that. So being able to understand that you have a virtual estate, it's running, it's healthy. You don't want to delve into every single operating system on that just for your backup process. You don't want to have an agent residing on every single system. We want to be able to, again, remove that complexity, but really align our capabilities with the capabilities of what is essentially our virtual data center. So we talk about, ooh, it's completely gone, powerful. They are still there, they're just quite great. And around complexity, being able to really reduce down that footprint. So we have a few Windows platforms, we do sit on Windows platforms, we don't have an appliance or anything like that, but really being able to reduce that complexity and make it easy to use, essentially, so that we're not having all of that resource time invested in trying to sort of, really just wrangle a product, right? Which is what people are used to with backup products. I know in my previous lives, the backup product needed to be handled like a wildebeest. It was never easy. And cost. So affordable, really approaching the idea that we want you to be able to have the product, work with the product, and be able to have the same sort of freedom that you have with your own virtual estate. You want to deploy some new VMs, 6 VMs. You don't want to have to go off to licensing and buy 6 more VM licenses. You don't have to. So I was trying to think like what kind of image I could put to really just bring home the change and the power over the top of like these ladies that are sort of suit and just go flash forward. That's the new sort of wave of backups. We want to be able to get that control and that power. So when you think of Veeam, just think of Flash Gordon there.
Should have done the music.
Great music.
Should have done the music.
So are there any questions? It's probably been a lot. I mean, version 7's just come out. I didn't want to do like a what's new because I wanted to sort of make sure that people who hadn't heard of the product at all got a lot of coverage. Anyone heard of any new features they want to know a bit more about? Or yeah?
Yeah. Backup and take you introduced in version 7.
That's right.
Correct. And is that granular restore as well?
So the way that works, there's a couple of different ways that it can work, but essentially you can have it as a follow-on to a job to move Veeam Backup files to tape. So it can be tied in with the Veeam Backup file. And in terms of the granularity of the restore, it's always going to have to bring back that full snapshot to a staging area to be able to do the restore.
Disk and then
but it's all within a wizard. So as long as you've got that staging area, it's a next, choose stuff kind of process. The other side of it is we can do now files to tape as well, and that includes from remote Windows machines. So if you've got a file share somewhere, you just need to be able to back up, that's sort of the second part of it.
So what about the backup to cloud, which I've heard a bit about recently? We replicate to these guys for a DR at the moment.
Yep.
And but what about just for retention? So because we use tape and I'm just sick of it.
Yeah, so in Australia, there are some challenges around the cloud edition, so we're usually pretty upfront about that.
Yeah.
It does require you to have pretty substantial bandwidth and not to have to pay a lot for uploads. So
we've got both.
yeah, so with that, it's sort of, it's been really popular in the US, and I think that's sort of more what it's designed for, but here, it will do that retention into the cloud, but if you need to do a restore, you need to bring it back. So
when you talk about bandwidth, what are you saying big? What do you mean?
So upload speed.
Yeah, we've got 250.
Yeah, and being able to, I guess, action in when you need to do a restore, being able to bring that back down to the site in a timely manner. And for most people's scenarios in Australia, that's not ideal. And also when we're doing a full backup change, like so at the local side, if we change the full backup file, at the moment, the way the product is, it has to upload the whole full backup again. So it's not change blockerware like all the other bits of our technology. Just because of the way the cloud APIs work, we're bringing up whole full backup files. So if you've got sort of open slather on your internet, it's good. If you don't, it's not so good. So it's something where if you've got a really sort of open slather internet connection.
It is. I'm just a bit more worried about the time. If you're saying it doesn't use CBT and you're having to chuck up full backups every single time and you can't just do a snapshot, then that might be a bit of
it's still deduplicated and compressed, but it's a lot of data.
Yeah.
And in most cases, I've sort of erred away from recommending it unless it's a very small implementation.
Yeah.
I'm sure that in future releases it will get more intelligent. It's the first iteration, and I think it's sort of hit a mark for part of the market more in the States, to be honest, and we're seeing a lot of uptake over there. But in Australia at the moment, there's just a few constraints around it. What you can obviously do is you can replicate into a partner cloud, which it sounds like that's what you're doing at the moment. And also, if you're leveraging compute in a cloud, you can actually just extend your Veeam environment into that cloud. So we see a lot of that, where people actually have a Veeam server in the cloud, which they extend over, or a proxy or a repository sitting in a partner cloud, which gives you a lot more options. If we're talking about into Amazon or into Azure, we can get the data there, but we can't do much with it once it's there. So a lot of that value add comes from the partner landscape within Australia.
I think as well, Dave, for campuses, leveraging something like Store Virtual that you have, we could actually build out another Store Virtual environment at Brighton Grammar, in another part of Brighton Grammar, and then utilise this to really bring it up.
Private cloud.
Private cloud, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll sing your praises all day. We had another provider in there which we tried to implement for 3 months, and it was just shit house. It was really bad, and wasted so much time and effort on it. We put this in 2 days. And
what you'll see in version 7 as well is the backup copy jobs. Even if you don't get the WAN acceleration feature, backup copy jobs allow you to have a local retention policy and then additional remote retention policies which are completely different.
Yeah.
So you can say we want to keep 30 days of dailies at the local site, but at the remote site we want weeklies, monthlies, annuals and all of that. So your retention becomes a lot easier.
You integrate with SAN-based snapshots as well, is that right?
At the moment for HP we do,
Yeah, that's what we've just got.
Yeah, so that's something else to have a play around with.
Yeah. That's going to be almost instant backups.
You're going to get some pretty fast backups. I've seen, if you combine it with the parallel processing, I've seen some pretty crazy implementations where it goes nuts. So a lot of that stuff, I mean, you still